So welcome everybody. This is the SharePoint Patterns and Practices, also known as the Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices office hours. And typically we get a lot of people actually joining slightly late, so that's absolutely fine, because for the first 5 minutes we're always repeating exactly the same slides, so it's kind of understandable as well. We're probably going to hit around 20-25 members joining on a call, and which is actually good, because that means that if there's any active questions or burning topics or whatever, we can unmute, or you guys can unmute and have a discussion then with the audio as well. We do have a few things to cover from a PnP perspective today, and then obviously the call is also recorded, and that's going to be published in the YouTube, actually, now that we are moving to the YouTube, which is one of the topics today as well. So let's actually get moving, and we'll get more and more people jumping on the call as we go. So first of all, the PMP, just making sure that everybody understands what is the SharePoint Patterns and Practices, or Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices, classic slide. But the PMP is there. PMP is owned by the SharePoint Engineering nowadays. So we used to be an individual initiative, but nowadays it's owned by the SharePoint Engineering, because SharePoint Engineering wants to use the PMP as the tool and a channel to provide guidance, samples, community actions for all of the new stuff within the SharePoint. So that's for existing SharePoint customizations, including on-premises, even farm solutions. We can talk about those if you have any questions. But obviously the main topics for the future is mainly the SharePoint Framework and also the SharePoint add-ins. Since we talk about SharePoint Online, also there's dependencies or references to Microsoft Graph and all of the other Office 365 APIs. We provide code samples, guidance documentation, monthly community calls, case studies, and all of that. Today's agenda, we never changed the agenda slide, but basically what we want to go always through, what is the office hours, what is the special interest group, and then what are we actually currently working, or if there's any kind of a specific topics what we want to talk about. So, and that part is going to slightly change in the future, also within this call, because SharePoint Engineering, whenever there's something we want to ask from the community, we kind of use the office hours actually for that as well. So we want to have your input if there's something what you want to say around SharePoint Framework, or something is missing, or you want to you have questions around some topics, we can absolutely go them through during this 1 hour. We do have a 1 hour booked again for this week, or every single bi-weekly. If we don't spend the whole hour, that's absolutely fine. We'll see how the discussions will start after, when we go to the Q&A section. So really the key point of the office hours is the open discussions and feedback. So you can ask and we can answer if there's any questions. If there's something which we can't answer, we'll follow up on those absolutely later on as well. So it's an opportunity for community to ask from SharePoint Engineering and the PMP core team related on what should I do, why doesn't something work, or what's the best practices for scenario X and Y and Z when I'm designing a solution for my customer. So your choice. If you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself then on the later part of the call. So let's actually get on going on the slides. Quick clarification, the PMP office hours, I kind of explained that one already. Then we do have a special interest group, which is right now for JavaScript. We'll see if we will spin up other ones. I think the JavaScript is working quite nicely. And we're even more, let's say, reorganizing or targeting that for the SharePoint framework, and also in general the JavaScript-based customizations within a SharePoint. So you as a community members, you can actually choose how do you want to track and how do you want to engage within the BMP initiative. You can join on the monthly calls, which is more around us explaining for the community what has happened within the past month, covering what samples have been added, what guidance have been added, and all of that. We do have this bi-weekly office hours, which is a one choice. You can join in, you can have a look on slightly different topics, maybe what we cover in a monthly call, a more practical discussion, and then also have that Q&A section within the call. Because typically in a monthly discussions or monthly calls, we don't have time. We always run out of time. And that's typically for me to blame, because I talk too much. And then if you want to be even more closely involved, there's the SharePoint client-side development. special interest group, and this is really around, hey, we want to customize SharePoint using JavaScript. What is the best practices and all of that? And that special interest group has been working on a JavaScript core component as well, which helps on getting access on SharePoint data using JavaScript interfaces, which works, by the way, already today in production, or it's going to work together with SharePoint Framework, which is in developer preview right now. Moving on things, what options do I have help on the BMP initiative? So obviously you can use our samples core component, JavaScript core component, .NET core component, or our guidance in MSDN or within the other resources. You can provide feedback using YAML group. I should have actually changed that because the YAML group will be killed quite soon, which is slightly unfortunate. There's a slide coming up on that one in a second. And we will be moving our discussion to the network.office.com. And I do know how horrible that is and all of that, but let's talk about that one in a second. But if you have run into an issue, if you run into problems, you can always go to the GitHub, open up a case in the issue list, and we're working on slightly more active way of addressing those issues and answering on the issues in the future. You can extend or improve existing samples in the PMP repos. Quite soon we will release also the SharePoint Framework repositories under the SharePoint organization. So there will be SharePoint Framework samples for people to consume and also contribute back. So if you find a bug, you can actually do a pull request and extend or improve existing sample also in a SharePoint Framework site. And then you can fix issues you encounter and submit a pull request based on that. So that's kind of the thinking around the BMP initiative. We in the SharePoint engineering, we really want to make sure that the future of SharePoint is absolutely transparent, and we are heading to the open source or source open direction. So obviously we want to make sure that whatever samples we show anywhere in Ignite or anywhere in the conferences will be available as a sample for you to consume or play around with or demonstrate to your customers or wherever you want to do that. And also we're looking into exposing a lot of the SharePoint Framework elements as an open source elements, at least the maturity of that. So people are able to even contribute on a SharePoint Framework, at least theoretically. But that's all of that plans, what's going to happen precisely within the SharePoint Framework side. I'm not going to commit on any of these promises yet. We do have a plan, but I cannot actually communicate that right now. But anyway, we in the SharePoint engineering, we absolutely want to be more open source, more transparent, so that the community can truly influence on the product, on the development cycles. You can actually easily reach out to the persons and complain, because quite often people tend to be in a way that they don't provide positive feedback, they provide negative feedback, because typically that's usually based on the fact that something in SharePoint on our tooling is causing challenges, and we actually want that feedback. It's really, really important that we hear about that, so we're able to fix the issues. It's better to actually talk out loud rather than let's say, not share the frustration between others. Now, let's go back on the today's call and today's topics. One thing what we kind of mentioned a few times already in the PMP monthly calls and in the past as well. So the PMP videos are moving to YouTube. We have actually launched this channel already this week. So the latest PMP webcast was linked already from the YouTube. So if you go http AKMS of SharePoint PMP videos or Office Dev PMP videos, you'll land to our channel 9, YouTube section or YouTube channel. And we've already uploaded some of the, let's say, classic videos which might be useful, or the latest videos around the demos, around the webcast, around the monthly calls, and all of that to the channel. In the future, for right now, all of the videos, what we do, they will be released. All of them will be released in YouTube. So for example, this particular recording will be going to the YouTube, but then the webcasts will go to the channel 9 and YouTube. The reason why we have to go to the YouTube is that the Channel 9 doesn't actually support playlists, and that's a massive limitation, considering the fact that we have special interest group meetings every single week. We have these bi-weekly office hours, and if we would actually publish all of these videos in the Channel 9, the one feed which is showing the latest videos would get really, really messy. Using the playlists in the YouTube, we're able to kind of manage all of the incoming videos what are we releasing. It's a change, but I think it's a change. It's not necessarily a change for a worse. I think it's a change for a better. One of the advantages of going to the YouTube is also the auto captioning, which is accessibility, which is in the accessibility objectives of the dev.office.com as an example. Even though the YouTube auto captioning isn't quite bulletproof, especially when it's doing auto captioning for Finglish. So there seems to be, or not a native English speaking person, or not an Oxford English speaking person, there seems to be some issues with the recognition. A link to the MP4 would be nice. Oh, that's actually a good point. So from a YouTube, you cannot download the videos. Ah, that's actually a brilliant point, Bill. I don't think we actually considered that. The problem is that in the past we've been releasing the special interest group videos and these bi-weekly office hours videos in a Yammer. But because the Yammer will be shut down, the Office 365 network, not the whole Yammer, we don't have that option anymore. So that's why we've been kind of heading to the YouTube direction. But we might need to actually, if there's more feedback on the getting the MP4 to an offline consumption, that's actually a good point. Maybe we should think about how to address that. Kind of I mentioned already the PMP moving from Yammer to network.office.com as well. So the Office 365 network where the PMP Yammer group has existed, and by the way, we've been super successful. The only downside has been that we've been the only successful Yammer group in the Office 365 network, pretty much. The PMP group has been by far the most active developer group in the Yammer network. And they have made a decision that going to the Yammer network is too difficult for, let's say, random community members, and that the fact that you need to register and not all of the information in the Yammer discussions are being indexed by Google or Bing. That means that it's not an optimal situation. So they want that our marketing has then released this network.office.com, which is the new community platform where you don't have to register to be able to read all of the discussions. So you're actually able to access all of the discussions, you're able to access answers and all of that. If you want to contribute, let's say like, or answer on any of the questions, then you need to register. And really the main benefit is that the search crawlers are able to index that information automatically. It is a big change, especially considering the fact that the BMP Yammer group had more than 4,600 members, and it was active. It was actually working. The Yammer group members were helping each other in the questions all the time. The transition might be slightly painful, but we're hoping that people are moving with us to the network.office.com. And obviously there are alternative options in the community for people to contribute. Nigel is asking, when will we get our own area? That's a good question. Now, there's an ongoing discussion on, how would I put it, where does the PnP belong? It kind of made sense when we started the BMP Initiative that we will have our own group in the Office 365 network, because we wanted to isolate, or not isolate the discussion, but we wanted to make sure that we're able to track all of the discussions related on the PnP assets. Now that the PnP is owned by SharePoint Engineering, it kind of makes sense that all of the PnP discussions are part of the SharePoint development group. Now, there's a downside of that statement though, which is that the PnP is much more than just SharePoint. We've been essentially, our history is by being Office 365 developer patterns and practices, which means that we are overlapping not just on SharePoint, but also on Yammer. Actually, we do have Yammer customizations and other Office 365 customizations there as well. So it would kind of make sense that we would have our own proper group and our proper, what are those, scopes? Are there scopes? I can't remember what they are actually in the network. We will have a look in a second. But to be able to get that, the demand for those groups will have to be shown by the community. So there's no point for me going and asking that, hey, we want to have our own group. That's not beneficial, even in internal discussion. But if the customers and the community, meaning you guys who are participating on this call, if you go and ask from the network.office.com that, hey, we want to have our own group like we had in the Yammer for PMP stuff, then that most likely will actually happen. So it's waiting for you to contribute on your opinions. So for now, that AKMS SharePoint PnP community is pointing to the SharePoint developer group in the network.office.com. And we'll move all of our, let's say, the announcements, all of our video things and all of that stuff directly to that group. I do agree, actually, that the group would be better. And it is pretty hard to find all the PMP-related questions right now from the network. But again, if you like that, go and vote. There is actually idea on that already written by Nigel. So if other ones like the same idea, go and vote that idea up, and we will certainly make sure that we have our own group. And then I'll update that AKMS link when that happens. Because right now, it's, well, we were chatting this earlier today with Bert. Right now, it's kind of an interesting situation. If we are as active as what we were in our existing BMP Yammer group, we would actually flood the SharePoint development group, which is not a bad idea. So if you have any questions, similar questions like you had in Yammer, just go to the go to the SharePoint group, SharePoint developer group in network.office.com, and start asking questions. And hopefully we can rebuild the community on that group. Whenever the community owners, these platform owners, realize that there's a lot of traffic from BMP, they might or might not consider the fact that we would have to have our own group. We'll see. There's advantages and disadvantages on both sides. Now, on that one, I'm quickly going to actually show you guys, so we get it also recorded. In here, I'm going to share my screen in a second, just making sure that I don't have anything confidential visible in the screen. So give me 1 second, and I'm going to go back in my home, and then I'm going to do sharing. And my screen, what I want to share is the monitor number 3. Always the challenge of having too many monitors. And I can see that many of you seem to already got it. Can you actually see what I'm sharing? Yeah, I know, Jonathan, I know. I would actually, well, I prefer a 4K monitor at this point, but still. You guys can see what I'm sharing, right? Just confirming. Somebody can write that in iOS window. Excellent. Thank you, Frank. So what I've done here is that I'm actually going to, just in case, I'm going to do a sign out. So you can see that it's actually right now an anonymous. Then, like mentioned, the whole benefit out of the network.office.com is the fact that I can go to the communities. I can scan through what communities do we actually have. For example, I can go to the SharePoint, and inside of the SharePoint we have the SharePoint developer. And in here I can read the stuff. All of this is getting indexed by the search crawlers and search engines. So that we can actually find that using search services. Now, when I sign in my case, I've already signed in quite a few times. So I'm going to use my Microsoft address for that. And voila, there we go. I can then see my additional information. In my case, I've already updated my profile. I have a profile picture. There's few settings to complete in my settings, but after that, it actually gives you quite nice notification feed. It actually gives you quite nice messaging feeds whenever there's somebody who's responding to you and or your messages, and you can see how many views whatever you're posting is getting. Or as an example, this one, input requested for needed SharePoint Framework materials, which we're going to talk about slightly more today as well. I can see that there's responses coming up from my notifications. And from my home, I can pretty easily then see what are my communities and what are my favorite spaces, and it's actually filtering down the newest popular experts and unanswered. Not too bad. It's pretty significant change, obviously, from Yammer, but it's better to right now start adjusting to this one, or what people can do alternatively, and which is kind of understandable as well. I was messing around SharePoint-exchange.com. So I was here for a while today answering for some of the questions. The only downside for the PMP community to go here is that this is getting massive amount of traffic, and majority of the things are questions, and all of that stuff gets pretty easily kind of hidden. So actually it's pretty sweet that we do not have massive amount of traffic in the network.office.com right now, which means that we can follow up on the discussion slightly more easily. But it's a matter of opinion. Again, there's multiple different channels, there are multiple different locations, but will at least the BMP, let's say the weekly webcasts and all of those communications will go to the SharePoint developer group for now. And we'll see how we move forward from here. And yes, there are multiple different opinions on the UI design of this service, but not going to actually, let's not even talk about that one too much. Let's see. The Q&A format isn't suitable for general PnP conversation, in my opinion. That's a good point from Paul. I would say that the network.office.com works much better on that kind of a discussion. So it's not you're not really looking for an answer, you're looking for opinions or additional ideas on the same topic. Yes, that's a good way of putting that, Bill. So the SharePoint Stack Exchange is for Q&A, network.office.com for discussion. I would that's a nice way of putting that. Please don't use SBSC for discussion. Oh, okay. So you're not asked to even to use that for discussions. There's a good question from Namburi, and let's get back on that one within a few slides. So that's a good question. We'll follow up on that one in a second. Good. That's about the network stuff. I'm going to switch back on the slides for a second, and most likely I'm going to, or I will go back on the screen in a second as well. So switching back on the slides for a few slides, and hopefully your network connectivity is good, that it's switching back there quite fast. If it is actually doing that, it didn't do that. Let's try it one more time. There we go. Good. So that's about the network.office.com, and I do know, I wrote a relatively long message in the Yammer thanking everybody for the Yammer group usage, which has been super successful, like mentioned, but we're kind of suffering from the fact that nobody else could pull it off in Yammer, and really the search indexing is the main thing. It's funny. It felt really bad to write a message which is saying, "Oh, this is going to be shut down, and we're going to miss you guys." But realities of life, only change is evident. Now, moving back on the other topics, there was already a good question from Resham. Which one of those is your first name and last name? It doesn't actually matter. Sandbox Solutions. So we do have the Sandbox Solutions. The code behind has been already plugged within a SharePoint Online. And let's be clear on the messaging on this one. So right now already in a SharePoint Online, if you do have a code-based Sandbox solution, it is actually executing absolutely fine, but you're unable to deploy new Sandbox solutions with code-based customizations or update any of the existing ones. So if you accidentally go and deactivate any of the existing Sandbox solutions, you cannot reactivate that one. And don't bother to try to do that using code. It doesn't work using the CSM code or whatever code you would be using. So there's no way actually going around that. The code-based Sandbox solutions were deprecated back in 2014, but unfortunately, it's pretty clear that the community didn't quite follow up on and didn't quite take it seriously, that it's deprecated. Deprecation means that we're no longer investing on that, and at some point it's going to be removed. And then I think it was 13th of July, there was an announcement that the code-based Sandbox solution support is going to go away within a SharePoint Online. Now, the official statement, well, I'm official representative of the SharePoint engineering, so so let's not confuse that. But in our messaging, we're saying that there's a roughly 30 days from the moment when we set the announcement. We do have an exception process. So if you do have an existing Sandbox solution which is business critical for your company, you are able to request an extension for your Sandbox solution code to be still working within a SharePoint Online. And you're able to use the SharePoint Online support for requesting those extensions. Those will be then routed to our Sandbox solution triage, which is a daily, daily meetup with certain people, me including and Bert included there, where we actually go through all of the exception requests and have a look on the actually inside of the code of the Sandbox solution. So we're trying to figure out, okay, is this a valid extension request? Is it a really complex Sandbox solution? If it's a complex Sandbox solution, the extension will be most likely approved, and at least for a few months. But it might be that your Sandbox solution accidentally contains an assembly, which is one of the options. So we then give guidance back on the support to actually reroute the messaging back on the people who are asking assistance. So you can request an extension, so that's a good thing to understand using the SharePoint Online support channels. We do have also a lot of guidance available for the Sandbox solution story and how to evolve that. And let me actually jump on the slides and walk through what we actually jump on the screen again and walk through what we actually have. So we're going to start from the network, and tell me again whenever you can see what I'm sharing. Good. The Paul at least acknowledged that. So if we go to the if we go to our PMP MSDN, so if we go to the MSDN where we have the solution guidance, in here in the left section, and this is linked in our public communications as well, we do have Sandbox Solution Transformation Guidance. And this was written 2 weeks ago, roughly. If I click that one, it actually has a relatively long story on steps to perform transformation, how to do the analysis, how to actually figure out what do you have within your tenant. There's 2 options on that. I'll come back on that one in a second. There's guidance on replacing Sandbox solution customizations. So depending on your customization style, what are your options and what you can do. And all of these are then linking to an additional resources. and what does the removing of a sandbox code from your site actually means. We also released quite recently additional 4 articles related on web parts, event receivers, feature receivers, and info path forms with code, depending on your Sandbox solution content. So as an example, for the question what we had here, that was for custom workflow custom actions. So I'll come back on that one in a second. But if it would be around the web parts, we have guidance here available, and there's a links to the additional resources. And I'm just realizing that we haven't actually updated this page to link to that example solution. Bert, do you mind actually taking a note on that? We need to update the link here. Oh, it is actually here. It's the simple React form. Yes, it is. It's that one, which is actually showing how to build a React JavaScript form-based application using React with form validation, Webpack, and all of that. So to replace existing code-based Sandbox solution web parts, and this one is actually saving these tickets as an example to a SharePoint list. It is using already kind of the modern way of doing stuff using the React and Webpack. The reason why it's doing that it's kind of gradually aligning to the SharePoint framework, because already today in production you're able to use all of these modern frameworks for the development. Modern is it's a debatable word, but this one is a relatively nice new example which is explaining how things are actually working. Good. On the workflow side, so the custom actions in a workflow, the story isn't actually really that good. So the problem with that one is that we don't have anything else to say related on user custom workflow actions than looking into what you can do with SharePoint 2013 workflows, or then call a web API or web service from that SharePoint 2013 workflows. And I do absolutely acknowledge and we understand that it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not a kind of a always one-to-one match on what needs to be done. Now, like mentioned, the alternative is that you will then ask for an extension and assistance from the SharePoint support around the Sandbox solution, and then most likely you'll get some additional support, additional guidance on that. But it's a good point to notice that people are using custom workflow actions still in a SharePoint 2010 workflows in SharePoint Online. What else? So one thing what we actually have here, one thing what I wanted to mention in here is the scanning tools, which is, and we can come back on the discussion on the Sandbox solution in a second. I just want to make sure that we don't actually spend the whole time with my monologue. So we do have we do have a PowerShell script which can be used to understand what Sandbox solutions do I actually have in a SharePoint Online. So this one is relatively nice. It is then outputting the list of Sandbox solutions and their hash. The hash is actually used if you do get an extension, you need to provide the hash, because the extensions are hash-based. So you will get an extension for that particular Sandbox solution and not for anything else. So the extension is not based on a name. And now, this script is a PowerShell based. The script, however, has a small challenge. It assumes that the tenant administrator has permissions for all of the site collections which you actually want to have access and which you want to scan. So to address that, we pretty recently released a additional tool written by Bert Jansen, our very own Bert Jansen from the BMP team, which is actually code-based tool, which is using then additional capabilities. So it's using the AppOnly Token to gain access on all of the site collections within a tenant. It still requires, obviously, that the tenant administrator will register the client ID and a secret. But after that, you will just configure or execute the tool and providing the client ID and a secret against that tenant. And you will get a full list of stuff from from that particular SharePoint Online tenant. This tool also has a few additional advantages. It is using multi-threading. It's also outputting stuff in a more usable format. It's also, you can actually set a switch where it's downloading WSP packages automatically. And if there's duplicates, it is indicating that as well. It can fix Sandbox Solutions with an empty assembly automatically. And there's a few other benefits out of this one. Anything but I missed, Bert?
No, you did a good sales talk.
Thank you.
I think one thing to add there is that it also scans your OneDrive business site collections, your My Sites.
Oh, yes. That's a good thing to notice. It also scans the My Sites. Because there might be old My Sites which do have Sandbox Solutions. And this also supports actually on-premises.
Premises. Yeah.
Ooh, does it mean that the Sandbox Solution is going to go from on-premises? No, it doesn't. At least for now. So our Sandbox Solutions are the code-based Sandbox Solutions fully supported in on-premises, and it's up to the farm administrator to decide what they actually use or not. Now, with the scenario where we want to scan the on-premises is the typical scenario where you want to understand, you're looking into migrating to SharePoint Online, and you want to understand what kind of customizations I have in my on-premises based on Sandbox Solutions, and will those customizations also work in a SharePoint Online? So using this tool, you're able to then scan through against the on-premises environment, either using the specific account or again using the client ID and a secret approach. In on-premises, most likely you would use the specific account because you can use the web application user policy to grant read permissions for a specific account. So you don't actually need to use a client ID and a secret.
Well, actually, it's not even possible to use client ID and secret on-premises. I've removed that option. You have to use an account from premises.
Okay. Oh, you removed that option completely.
Because
theoretically you can do that.
Theoretically, yes, but then you can't use search with the app only on premises.
True.
So, and you can't do that online. So there's too many differences. So the easiest for everyone is that you just create an account and use a web application policy to grant that account permissions, which typically customers already have those accounts available. So
yep.
That's the easiest.
Good point. Fair point. But anyway, that's a new tool available in the BMP, and maybe a small thing related on this one, which relates on the previous discussion. So we do have actually video explaining and showing this tool in the SharePoint/Office 365 Dev BMP channel in YouTube. And this one is essentially showing all of the options, how does it actually work, and all of that in practice against SharePoint Online. And by the way, if I click from there, we can see our very own PnP channel in YouTube. So this particular office hours call is going to be released here as well. I think we have one office hour recording already available. Good. Switching back on the slides. I do have a few things. And by the way, if you have any questions, we'll absolutely following up on the discussions in the IM. But I think I don't have any live demos anymore. And Bert is answering on Reshma's question. Good. Thank you, Bert, for that. So one thing, big thing, what has happened since last week is the SharePoint Framework and the SharePoint Framework developer preview since 2 weeks ago. And that's a big thing. Last Wednesday, was it Wednesday? It was Wednesday. Yes, it was Wednesday. The last Wednesday, we finally published, well, actually, last Tuesday night, PST, we actually published our NPM packages first time, but nobody knew about it. And then on Wednesday, we went live, an announcement in the dev.office.com with the SharePoint Framework preview to be available for others to start playing with. And this is obviously a big thing. It's important though realize that this is a developer preview. There's a lot of stuff which will be optimized. There's a lot of stuff there won't be that much stuff which will be actually changed within a coding perspective, but there might be some changes still even in the APIs, which means that you shouldn't be running the SharePoint Framework client-side web parts in production yet. We will move into the production mode sooner or later. right now we wanted to actually start by having the tutorials and the NPM packages available so that the community can actually learn that and understand, hey, this is how it works. Awesome. Now I have the basics, and let's wait for things to actually go forward and to have proper additional documentation available. We were forced due to certain internal reasons. We released even our tutorials in a GitHub. That wasn't actually by design. So the tutorials and documentation will be officially released or relocated to dev.office.com/SharePoint quite soon. And there will be then additional tutorials, additional documentation, and all of that inside of the dev.office.com. It was dev.office.com/SharePoint will be then the address. You can and at that point you can actually submit contributions also to the tutorials. So if there's any challenges or issues or bugs or typos in those tutorials, you can always do a pull request in a GitHub, and those articles will be in a GitHub. You're able to actually get your contributions inside of the official documentation as well. And by the way, that logo, what you're seeing on the slide, that's not really official logo. I just threw an SB or an X together with a SharePoint. So that's designed by me, just to have a SharePoint Framework logo, whatever the SX actually means. Few things what I wanted to kind of go through, and this is something what I asked already in Yammer and in network.office.com and in Facebook and in Twitter and in all social media channels. And at least in network.office.com, we actually got a few insights on this one. Really the key question is, what do you guys need? So right now, the existing tutorials are more around, hey, this is how you get started. So this is how you actually do a scaffolding of a project. This is how you start talking to SharePoint. This is how you deploy. And this is a follow-up list on the planned tutorials. So we'll work on the how to work with external scripts. We need to get the story slightly better clarified. Pre-configured entries in with web parts, because we do have a kind of a similar experience as .webpart files in the new client-side web parts as well. So we're able to have multiple configurations of the same web part in a SharePoint framework. Multiple web parts in one project. There's an issue for that one right now. There will be an update obviously coming up. Creating custom property pane controls, Azure app permissions, how to prepare production builds, migrating existing JavaScript apps to SharePoint framework. Some of this stuff we kind of have done a webcast, for example, with Wildec at some point, but we want to make them more as a tutorial. So you are able to follow up either the article, or then you're able to have a look on the video, which covers the same thing. We will also have additional samples coming up immediately when we open up the samples repos underneath the SharePoint organization. And we, by design, want to make sure that these are simple enough for people to actually step in and start learning on a SharePoint framework. And that's obviously always debatable. And there's some opinions in the internet or interweb where people are saying, yeah, you shouldn't be actually doing that simple stuff or releasing those kind of samples, because then people will start building on top of them. Well, if it's a simple sample, that's actually really good, because simple samples are great stepping stones to understand how would I then evolve that sample to a production. Simple sample doesn't mean that it wouldn't be production ready. So as an example, we'll absolutely pinpoint on the samples that which of them are, in quotes, production ready, because simple CRUD operations with React probably won't be production ready, or why not? The UI might be rough, but it's actually showing how to create, read, update, and delete items in a SharePoint list using React or using JavaScript, or let's say general JavaScript, not without React, or using Angular. Also, trending documents in a site, my documents, Azure AD implicit flow sample is in a plan, and elevation sample. So how do you actually elevate within the permissions in a SharePoint framework client-side web part? Which is not a simple story, because you need to have an external service to do that, but it's doable. Yes, and that's absolutely true what Bill is saying. So this is a developer preview. So that's super important for people to realize. This is the first. You might actually think of this as I wouldn't say that it's an alpha version, Alpha version was that what we used in our dev kitchens, which were for really, really limited set of audience, and maybe this is the beta version. But you should never go to the production using beta product. And this is only, and that's also, by the way, the reason why it's only working within a dev tenants, because we want to make sure that nobody goes to the production using existing setup. It's not a production ready yet. So, and I think I actually had, oh, I didn't, oh, it's all in the one slide. So here we go. But now the question is, existing tutorials, and I know that Bill and Nigel, as an example, has gone through this, and Paul probably have checked them out, and a few others in the call. What else do we actually need? What's missing? What's bothering you? Why didn't you guys have? We need to have X and Y and Z before we can start actually thinking even to go to the SharePoint, go to the production with the stuff. Well, surely we need to clean some of the stuff. We need to reduce the development overhead. We need to reduce the NPM dependencies. The folder sizes are pretty big with the SharePoint framework. All of that, absolutely no. But what kind of guidance and samples? What kind of samples? What's a great sample how to do stuff? Solutions to common problems. That's fair, but what is a common problem? That's a pretty generic comment.
Okay, right. So I think a lot of the negative comments have come about the size of the amount of code, the time it takes to download all these dependencies and then makes an enormous file structure.
True.
And I think one of the problems was that if you install Node, by default you get Node Package Manager, NPM, and that's version 2. And you really need to be using version 3 of the Node Package Manager. And I think the documentation has been updated now, but yep. That was creating those very deep paths to the Node modules and creating huge directory structures,
True.
Which a lot of people recoiled with horror from. Now, once you get NPM version 3 installed, it works a lot better. It's still quite big, so I mean I think that's still a valid complaint about it.
And that's true. That's true. But Bill, I would still say that the fact that do we have 150 megs of dependencies or 200 or 300, it doesn't actually. What's the difference on the fact that, okay, if I build the web part, it won't have that. It's only the development time experience. And what we're right now looking, and what I'm at least looking, so certainly we'll fix the dependency and we want to target that folder structure to be minimized. But what else do we need? What tutorials do we need? So that people actually can start building their own client web parts? That's really the key question. The fact that the folder size would be 2 megs doesn't actually change the question.
Well, it's not 2 megs. It's more like 2 gigs.
But, exactly. But that doesn't change the question. That what do you need to actually?
Yeah, I agree that Webpack will compress it all, but it is a shock to developers who have maybe been used to using Visual Studio,
True.
Which may also download half a gigabyte of stuff, but it's kind of hidden away. Exactly. So that's perhaps something you can communicate in the documentation and point people. I don't know, some of the Node NPM documentation, but that was a critical thing. Was the if you get the wrong version of the Node Package Manager, you will get certain messages and warnings and things. So that's what I meant about solutions to common problems. Will be a good thing, like a Q&A section in the documentation. Say, if you see this problem, like the huge directory, this is probably what's happened. And as we discover these things, we can add to that documentation. That will help people getting on board who are going to struggle when they first see this stuff.
Yeah, but obviously that's kind of a tooling part. So let's imagine that the tooling part is done. Then the question is, okay, what do you now need to be able to start implementing customizations on top of the client-side web part? What kind of tutorials and samples would be useful? Maybe on top of what we're seeing within the slides, or if we would have all of this stuff, what I'm mentioning on the slide, would people be like, oh, this is exactly what I need? silent. Bill, you can actually go unmuted as well, so we don't.
Oh, okay. Well, to fill the void,
doctor.
yeah,
No,
fill the airspace, yeah. Yes, I think perhaps. Examples would be useful that are of practical applications of this. So yes. I'm trying now to think of practical web parts that we would have built in the past using the web part framework in ASP.NET.
Yep.
And building the equivalent using this new model. I think that will be quite useful, particularly if we can show that, or show developers that this is, you can only need a few lines of code. And just one other point actually is there's a tendency to trying to introduce everything into these, so they keep things as simple as possible, and that might, I don't want to go on about the dependencies, but for example, if you look in the web part code, you'll see there's like an indirection to where it gets the CSS classes, and I think you've got to think, is that strictly necessary for the start? Maybe that's something you can add later as an embellishment of the starter code. So you just got a single TypeScript file to work with. And also there's code in there to deal with internationalization. But, a lot of users don't have that problem to solve and they're not interested in it. So do we want to carry the ability to handle internationalization in every single sample one, or do we start with a much simpler sample and then there's another example how to do this if you've got multilingual?
That's an awesome example, the multilingual or multi-localization supports in a web port. Yeah. It's an awesome example of a thing which is a really difficult decision. Do we want to include that in a scaffolding projects as the default structure, or do we actually want to add that as a additional thing? Because now, if we would not have added that in the support, or this is how it actually make it work, by default within the scaffolding project, then some of the feedback would have been, you're not thinking about anybody who's multilingual or the global deployments.
We've got a good opportunity with the Yeoman generator to simply ask the question. The default is no localization.
Yes.
Do you want localization? And that argument goes away.
Yes.
Provided you don't end up with 1,000 questions, of course. In which case you go to a config file or something.
Yes. But you're absolutely correct on that. And actually, the Yeoman template is one of those things which will be. Well, at least right now, it seems to be that it will be absolutely open sourced under the SharePoint repo. So that's one of the things which people can actually contribute back and say, hey, that's wrong. I want to have this, and you can even submit a pull requests on the process. Because there's no point for us kind of not exposing that as an open source implementation.
I don't think there's a reason, because it's not got your proprietary code in. It's using other open source tools and so on.
Exactly.
And you can use maybe the same development model that we have for the PnP core and the JavaScript core and so on.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Another sample, Vesa, would be with Patrick's JavaScript core framework as well. I did try that. I got that working with. I got one working with React and the PnP JS core.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that, and that's something which is absolutely. Well, in the progress, Patrick is actually on vacation and holidays this week, and he's been unfortunately super busy with the Sandbox Solutions thing. Something big on that one landed on his table from a coordination perspective. I'm sorry for smiling and laughing. It's not a
lucky Patrick.
Exactly. So that's the reason why things haven't been evolved on that side too much or as fast as in the past.
No, but he's left something there that you as a starting point that you can work with.
Yes,
which is interesting.
And there's a comment from Nigel that you mean I ducked when it came your way. Pretty much, yes. I was really closely involved, but now that I'm in engineering, no longer in CXP, I was able to duck that, and it's landed on the different organization. In my previous role, it would have been me. So, but that's a different discussion. Yep.
Can we talk about multiple web parts on a single page and when that's going to appear?
Yeah, I was actually just pinpointing on those suggestions as well.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Having no worries. So technically, right now in the classic, you should be able to have multiple client-side web parts in a single page and the classic pages, as long as you deploy your web parts using the production mode. So using the CDN, there should not be anything breaking you to do that. If there is, that is actually a bug. But we can absolutely work on a tutorial which is explaining the model, explaining how to do that with the screenshots and step-by-step guidance. But anyway, that's a fair comment, no doubt, Nigel. Anything else? And obviously the web part connections was mentioned by Paul. I got that one up as well, and it is in our extended list of tutorials, so it was on the list. Right now the web part connections it's not natively supported in SharePoint Framework for the client-side web part. It is actually in the queue to get natively supported, but technically you can do the connections already today using your own code. It's not an optimal setup, but hey, we can absolutely build a story around that as well. But let's put it this way: if we would have to do something like signal R. Yeah, well, no. Actually, in the client-side web parts, it would be slightly different. The signal R refers more on the iframe-based client-side web part, so app parts. And that's when you cannot use the browser or the page as your channel to talk between the iframes. That's when you have to go, let's say, back-end side. And that's when you go to signal R. That's an old example which I wrote.
I think he's probably thinking about server-side push to the client side.
Yeah, so I did write the app part signal R connected web app parts like 2 years ago as an example. But in the client-side web parts, because everything is executed in the same page, you can actually find the other client-side web part using just a get me an ID, and all of these client-side web part instances have a unique ID as well. So technically you can actually do that using your code, and then you're able to talk between each other without signal R. No doubt, using signal R, you can do, let's say, alternative additional scenarios, which might be pretty interesting. Good. Now, the question which I almost got there was, if we would have all of this plus the things what was mentioned in the discussions together with Bill and all of that, but pretty much it's this stuff what we have on this slide, and that a few additional things. If we would have this by Ignite or by mid-September or by before we actually open up the SharePoint Framework for first release, would that be like, oh, awesome, now I can actually start working on stuff? Or would you be like, hey, we're missing, and then the question is, what would be mission? Obviously, there's a lot of stuff like ALM, testing details on the web parts and all of that, which we need to work next. But now the immediate question is more around, okay, how do we get people to write the client-side web parts, what's actually needed to help them to get started. All of the follow-up questions on the ALM side and development cycles and testing automation and all of that, those are pretty logical, and we'll work on them after the initial setup. Nigel would be at least happy.
Okay, well, I think you have to take the temperature of your audience, and you can see the reaction now that you've released what you've released, and you've got to take a view, I guess, as to at what point is the advantage of making it properly released.
True.
Outweigh the disadvantage of people saying this is missing, that's missing, this is terrible, and so on.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. My gut feel is we're not there yet.
True, no doubt. We need to do additional builds, we need to do additional topics. But again, if we would get the basics and techniques and the NPM dependency numbers down, then the tooling in a better format, again, the guidance which would be needed for you to get started, I think we're pretty well covered with the setup what we have on the slide, right? working with search. Yes, well, that's kind of covered in my documents or trending documents in a site. That's a search-based implementation, but you're absolutely correct, Nigel, on that. Not putting out something and then doing a 180 and forcing breaking changes. Yep, absolutely agree on that, Paul. And that's absolutely not a plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think once you release something, it makes it very, very difficult then, almost infinitely more difficult to make some fundamental change.
Sure, no doubt. And we need to make sure that whenever the version 1.0 comes out, it is no doubt stable enough, and that our own engineering understands the impact of broken changes within the platform. In the same way as we don't actually release breaking changes within the CSAM APIs or REST APIs, because we can't. We would actually kill our ecosystem if we would do that. Which version of SharePoint does SharePoint Framework support? So SharePoint Framework is only for SharePoint Online for now, so not for on-premises. It will be landing on SharePoint 2016 during next year as part of the 2016 updates, but it will never ever land on SharePoint 2013. Good question and good clarification. Well, never say never. If maturity of our on-premises customers in SharePoint 2013 would start yelling and demanding SharePoint Framework to land on a SharePoint 2013, or they would actually leave Microsoft and move to competitors, then maybe that might happen for SharePoint 2013 as well. Pretty far-fetched, but the community input, customer input is really the way how we design our following roadmap as well. So your input actually does matter. Go to the user voice, go to the issue list, go to the whatever. Don't complain at home. Make noise out of your opinions. They do matter. Make some noise. Cool. We're 2 minutes off on top of the hour. Maybe I talked too much actually when we started on the other topics, but at least we got some stuff covered on that one as well. I know that you guys have other meetings to attend. I do as well. So let's actually close up for today for the PnP bi-weekly office hours. This week we still have the JavaScript special interest group tomorrow. We're going to talk about more on the SharePoint framework and probably going to touch the tutorial discussion tomorrow as well. So for those who will join tomorrow on the special interest group, think about what's needed, think about the feedback. I want to get that collected as well. And then we will have the bi-weekly PnP office hours again in 2 weeks, and pretty close to that we will actually have our monthly community call for the September. Actually, it's week before. So most likely September master merge will happen on the 9th of September, and the monthly community call is on 13th of September. Yes, it is. And then we're heading to the Ignite schedules. But anyway, thank you everybody for joining. Please go to network.office.com for input questions. We'll follow up on those lists. Yammer is still live few days, and we'll absolutely follow up on if there's anything related on these discussions. Please give us feedback, use the channels, and thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again in the following office hours. So thank you, and the recording will be live in YouTube slightly later, hopefully today. Thank you.